This is the epic conclusion of the Industrious Rogue and his party. We left off with them trying to figure out how to make money off of souls. Valinar's plan was to get in contact with someone of power in the upper planes that would be willing to offer recompense in exchange of them saving tormented souls from the lower planes. They would create a demon hunting brigade, snatch the wretches into Galarian, throw them into a pool of mercurial water, and hope they didn't explode or turn into goo. Of course, they most likely would have had to pose as Johnny Do-Gooders in order to convince the guys upstairs, but that could be taken care of easily. Jack sort of forcibly volunteered as no one else in the party wanted to get alignment changed due to fears about what that could eventually cause given their actions, and was designated as the STC's Heavenly Ambassador. Vorgot commented over a cigar and a bottle of Talden brandy, and three women doing their best to massage the Ulfin giant. Why hadn't the angels done that themselves, given they had a whole sea of the stuff? But with no one there to listen and the barbarian's mind going in a different direction, that slight inconsistency was left in the wind. Valinar and Hassan took a leave of absence and teleported into Absalom, the greatest city in Galarian, to find people suitable to work in the Demon Hunting Brigade, deemed the Tactical Forgiveness Unit, but later nicknamed as the Piety Punchers. Absalom has a very particular characteristic that makes it suitable to find that sort of labor. At its center rises a massive cathedral which holds a relic known as the Starstone, a meteorite that fell to Galarian, supposedly summoned by Aboleths in order to destroy the human race. Said to be able to turn mere mortals into gods, hundreds of heroes travel to this place from all over the world in order to enter the cathedral and go through the mysterious trial of the Starstone, which, if completed, would ensure godhood. Despite the high points of heroes such as Iomide and Kadian, who succeeded at the trial by accident while drunk, becoming the god of ale and adventurers, most never accomplish their goal and end up as depressed swords for hire filling Absalom's taverns and wenching houses. It took them both a week, but eventually they gathered a crowd of 20 men valiant enough to dare venture into the lower planes to capture demons, dumb enough to ask no questions, and greedy enough to do it all for bags of gold. They brought the men back with them to Saltspit, and after a few days of preparation, sent them on their first mission, to capture a dozen demons from Avernus, the upper layer of the Nine Hells. Things escalated rather quickly. Though they suffered some casualties, the Piety Punchers proved to be quite effective, and soon Hassan decided to expand the operation by creating 2 additional brigades, the Godly Gobsmackers and the Saintly Stompers. Valinar had to figure out that, if they were going to get any endorsements from celestial beings, the whole thing would have to seem honest, so they would have to carry on with them some pro bono sin cleansing for a while before trying to contact someone in order to have something to show. In 2 weeks of work, they got nearly 300 creatures cleansed, between minor devils, demons, and some other things without clear classification they found in Pandemonium. Before deciding to send Jack to get someone feathery on their side, there were some tense moments when a demonic commander got involved after the brigades apparently kidnapped some of its soldiers. But nothing that a band of 60 disgruntled heroes armed with liquid goodness couldn't handle. On the side, the workers at the pumps had been reporting a marked increase in Archon sightings. Before traveling to Celestia in the company of almost 300 renewed souls, Jack had taken not 1, but 3 dives in his personal mercurial bathtub before embarking through the mirror to try to contact someone that would hear their pleas to help the tortured. Jack had become sort of addicted to using the liquid, washing himself with it every time he did even the slightest thing that could be deemed bad. He kept a pristine, lawful good alignment in the same way a hypochondriac keeps his hands germ-free by scalding them with boiling water and tears off his skin with industrial-grade cleaner. It was unsettling, to say the least. He roamed the lovely, puffy fields of Lunia for 2 days before being met by an angelic emissary of Cordelia, the Lady of Charity, which took him in for an audience with her mistress. Cordelia ruled from a monumental house of hospitality, where wounded angels from the blood wars were tended by the kindest of petitioners, whose hands would wash away all weariness, pain, and disease. Or, at least that's how it used to be. What Jack was confronted with was more in line with what you would expect from a leprosy house out in Jerusalem after the Crusades. Dank, stinky air filled with the smell of putrefaction and disease, with wounded angels festering in their sores and covered in pustules. The petitioners themselves weary and sick, and the whole place had an overwhelming aura of death and defeat. Jack was confronted by a particularly angry Lady of Charity, whose blackened hair was dropping in dry tatters, eyes yellow with rheumatism. She gazed at the legion of bright-eyed saved ones with a mixture of disgust, remorse, pity, and anger, before calming down a notch and giving Jack a tour through the facilities. She stopped in front of a big marble fountain from which thick greenish water flowed. "So, it has been you who has poisoned our waters," she told Jack, trying to remain as calm as possible, evidently struggling. "Filled our waters with sin and corruption." All Jack could do was point at her with 2 fingers, smile and say, "Yeah, about that." Jack managed to get himself kicked out of the healing house by a mob of angry petitioners and eventually made his way back into Saltspit. After hearing what happened, the party decided on 2 things. First, they would considerably step up security around the pumps, fearing some sort of retaliation. Now that they understood why Archons were so keen on watching their actions, they thought for a moment about getting evil-infused rock from Avernus, but eventually came to their senses and remembered that the whole point was to seem like they were doing it for good. Instead, Hassan had the idea of sending elderly people from Saltspit into healing groves devised around the pumps. The idea was to put so many frail people in the area that no good aligned being would dare to mount an attack. Second, Valinar decided to take the negotiations on his own. Through their contracts in the Church of Desna, they managed to secure a priest in Opara who would put them in contact with a powerful entity from Celestia. They offered a substantial donation to the church in exchange for the priest visiting them in Saltspit, and carried out the ritual, meeting with Aberrus, one of the many servants of Desna. Though Aberrus had an unfavorable reaction at first, Valinar managed to convince him the very reason they were doing this was to atone for their sins. His massively overpowered bluff roll, coupled with a will saving throw to avoid having his mind read that passed by the skin of his teeth, helped smooth things over. And eventually Aberrus had to recognize that the party was indeed saving tortured souls from damnation. When one of the saved ones showed up to be a fallen former paladin of Desna, it all clicked, and Aberrus decided to help the players. After they explained the issue with Cordelia, Aberrus offered to act as an intermediary to calm the Lady of Charity. Since the pumps were not attacked, the party assumed it worked, even though the waters had indeed started to turn thick, pestilent, and slightly acidic to the touch as their savings continued. Valinar kept in contact with Aberrus, and together they worked on the organization of a better financed force. The angel offered the party access to substantial wealth, but the priest noted that they had enough money for themselves. Instead, he asked for assistance in a more meaningful, hard-to-attain way. 3 weeks later, Aberrus returned with a pack of old scrolls from Celestia's library, detailing 3 magnificent treasures that would be able to assist them. The first was an item known as the Gatecrasher. This relic apparently was able to open portals across the plains by simply swinging it and smashing a surface, once employed by a great hero to save his people from destruction. The Gatecrasher was hidden in Carcery, which gave them a chance to do some actual adventuring, adding a good measure of monsters from Greek mythology. So after spending some days fighting Cyclops and Chimeras, they got their hands on a rather crude wood and cloth hammer, similar to those used to bang gongs. It was extremely heavy, so Vorgok was tasked with using it after Valinar had conducted some research. The scroll suggested that the person bearing the Gatecrasher would have to call out one of the ancient names of the plains it listed, strike a surface, and then a portal would open. They tried it out with Ikabar, the ancient name of Galarian, and Vorgok smashed a wall open, sending everyone else flying into a blinding explosion of light and opening a 60-foot wide rift into Galarian. The party arrived at a nondescript location in Varissia. Valinar was out of teleports, so they took the flying carpet and returned home after a few days. On the way back, they studied the other 2 scrolls. The Wellspring of Well-Being, a mystical cauldron said to allow anyone within its vicinity to survive in even the most dire of environments. Thought to have been abandoned by its last owner in the World Wound and later recovered by a traveler who now posed as a prophet to the gods and used the wellspring to perform miracles. The Quill of Karlovac, made from a golden feather plucked from a sphinx. The quill was supposedly employed by several powerful magicians throughout history to trap spells within the scrolls and grimoires. It was currently kept as a relic in the headquarters of the Pathfinder Society. The party spent a week in Saltspit, coordinating and managing the city, and finally decided to head out to get those 2 other relics, except for Hassan, who wanted to stay back and work on his orbital golem plan. This time, he finally detailed what he wanted to accomplish, which made me understand his previous questions about the planes. He wanted to get multiple iron golems in geosynchronous orbit above the most important cities of the Inner Sea, filled with all manners of contingency spells ready to open a portal to the null region between the negative energy plane and the quasi-elemental plane of vacuum, releasing the nothingness there and obliterating everything around the impact area. He thought that since iron golems heal 3 HP per point of fire damage, and any excess gets turned into temporary hit points, they would amass so many temporary hit points due to the heat caused by atmospheric friction during planetary entry that they would be able to survive the crash and release the spells on the impact zone. The crater caused by the crash proper would be icing on the cake. Alums didn't work because, unlike their brass golem cousins, they did not heal with fire, but rather from negative energy, so that explained his insistence on getting iron golems. I ruled that it made sense, though I still wondered how he planned on getting the golems up there. But Hassan's player was quick to remind me of the interplanetary teleportation spell from Ultimate Magic. He had originally intended to use a pack of resistance spells to survive the placing, but the wellspring suggested a much less problematic solution. So he remained in Saltspit, planning the whole thing with Baba Ganoush from the Casters Union, while the party did some fun adventuring, retrieving the relics, exposing the owner of the wellspring as a fake, and stealing the cauldron afterwards. The quill involved a lot of planning at first, trying to decide how to assault the Pathfinder Society's headquarters, but they eventually found out that throwing a Vorgok at things was a considerably more straightforward solution. Once everyone got back together, the party got a visit from Aberrus. He had been tracking the party and found out about Hassan's plans. Worse yet, he'd been running background checks and realized that he had been far too trusting. So, after an appropriate trumpeting arrival in the company of flaming archons, the angel gave a furious warning to the characters, heralding rains of fire and divine justice and all that. He carried a ridiculously long scroll with all the sins committed by the party, and proceeded to read them aloud in a correspondingly dramatic manner. "Shit," said Hassan. "How do we get out of this one? The water will probably make these guys stronger, if anything. Plus, we've lost a lot of business venture, and I don't like losing business ventures." "Well, it's polluted with sin. Maybe it will harm them," noted Rakim. "Though then again, he is a herald of Desna, and support will probably come quickly even if we manage to bring him down." Jack just washed himself hysterically with mercurial water, while Vorgok debated himself between charging to chew the Archon on the left or charging to chew the Archon on the right. Caught in the absurd bureaucracy of heaven, Valinor guessed Aberrus would not be able to carry actions against them until all their sins had been made evident. So he took Vorgok and whispered to him, "Take the gatecrasher, run through the mirror, then," he shook his head, "scratch that. I need you to fail your next save." The priest figured out it would be easier just to take control of Vorgok's mind than explain the whole thing, and the barbarian agreed. So suddenly, Vorgok sprinted out of the scene, grabbed the gatecrasher, jumped through the mirror into Celestia, ran across the pumping station, made a grotesquely high acrobatics roll to dive into the Silver Sea, swam as deep as he could, and once in the bottom, called the name Athabatic, and smashed the ground, opening a 60-foot wide rift into Avernus, the first layer of hell. It took a lot of swim rolls to be able to go up rather than into the rift, losing the gatecrasher in the process. Valinor's player was pretty upset about that, but Vorgok finally got out. Behind him, the Silver Sea began pouring into Avernus, like a giant toilet being flushed. Mixing the holy waters from Celestia and the corrupted earth of Bator, flames erupted from the eye of the ever-enlarging whirlpool, and a shock of blackness began overtaking the waters, rising foul winds and withering everything it touched. Things weren't much better on the other side, as a tidal wave of mercurial water washed away the sins in what pretty much was Sin Central, breaking the earth in explosions of white light and causing widespread destruction, pulling petitioners out of their tortures just to drown them in the current afterward or smash them against a rock. Aberrus panicked, the moment the rift opened and connected heaven with hell, disappearing instantly and dropping the scroll, which Hassan promptly burned. "No idea if that does anything, but just in case they don't have a backup," he said while sort of dancing on the remains, and then turned to Vorgok. "Now, what on earth did you just do?" The barbarian shook his head. "No idea. Ask the priest." Valinor panted from the effort. "Pull the angel's attention away from us. Their precious sea is now draining into hell." The party remained silent for a moment until Hassan spoke. "And what will happen?" "Worst case scenario, they close it up and come back for us twice as angry. There is also the chance devils get angry at us too, and come to get us as well," Valinor responded. "Best case, Celestia gets poisoned to its core and doesn't bother us anymore. There's also a good chance that we have just created a new battlefront for the Blood Wars, and both sides will spend their time fighting around the rift, which won't close until someone finds the gatecrasher, which, considering how it fell into Avernus, seems unlikely now." "So, shouldn't we close the mirror?" Jack pointed out. "It's kind of a disaster zone." The party had been gazing through the mirror for a while, as Lunia quickly turned black from corruption seeping into its waters. Devils clawed out through the poisoned waves and began engaging the bands of angels, archons, and other holy beings gathering above the rift. And the whole thing seemed right out of a medieval canvas. "Good idea," said Hassan, and uttered the words to close it. Some elders and workers had managed to get out. Several dozens were left behind. He covered the mirror and had some assistants take it to the palace. Perhaps it'll be useful later. If there really is a new battlefront, someone will have to provide them with weapons. Those plans would have to wait, though, as right now the pressing matter was to get those golems into orbit. Alkenstar had been sending packs of 5 golems per trip, and with everything else covered, it was time to get working. The party had been fearing for a while a retaliation from the remaining packmasters, but so far things had been quiet. That meant that either they had been properly scared and decided to stay out of their way, or were preparing for a bigger offensive. Both cases made orbital golems fundamental, at least according to Hassan. A considerable amount of money was poured into the project. As it went through, they encountered a couple issues. The first one was Baba Ganoush's people, save for one, were unable to muster the level of arcane magic required to cast contingency portals into the null zone. Help had been brought from distant corners of the land, and the gnome was given the task of gathering it. The members of the Tactical Forgiveness Unit, now that good deeds were no longer profitable, were reorganized into the Business Enhancement Division. And their first mission was to assist Baba Ganoush into getting what they needed, even if it needed some steel glove slapping, or perhaps especially if it needed some steel glove slapping. The second was setting up the whole issue regarding orbital coordinates and golem trajectories. Hassan wanted to set up golems on top of the most important cities, namely Opara, Egorian, Sothis, Almas, Kathir, Absalom, and of course, Katapesh. He also figured out putting some on top of Alkenstar, Geb, and Mekatar would help in case the states directly to the south wanted to get frisky with the STC. So, 50 golems spread across 10 cities meant 5 golems per target, more than enough to reduce all of them to nothingness. This problem forced the party to start hunting down mathematicians, natural philosophers, and just about any kind of NPC that could help them with the dense level of calculations needed to get it right. A huge NASA-like operation was set up next to the STC Palace, with the alchemists from Arcane Services working on all manners of homunculi to serve as assistants and abacus handlers. Number-crunching soared when they started casting Owl's intellect en masse, and more when Valinar got a hold of some gnomish smart water, though those who were given the liquid at first died from cranial explosions due to grotesquely swollen brains. We fast-forwarded to the point that operations started taking shape. There were some minor incidents during that period, the only one of note being something involving what the party suspected to be spies from someone in Katapesh. The 50 iron golems had been delivered, and had been set up with null charges and contingency spells. A landing platform had been erected near the palace, on top of one of the old dirt piles left from the mine digging, on top of which the golems had been set up. All manners of working crews and magical analysts, structural inspectors, and what have you skittered around them, magically enhanced voices echoing through the place just to give it the right feel. Standing on a balcony, Hassan rose a glass of wine to the rest of the party. "Gentlemen, I think words are in excess here. Let us simply bask in the glory of what is to come." After they toasted and drank, he turned around. "Mr. Baba Ganoush, bring them up." One by one, arcane crews assisted by the wellspring, and reasonably scared into efficiency by Vorgok's presence, began teleporting away with the golems and setting them up in orbit. One of them had a mishap and almost sent one of the golems intended to menace Opara crashing down, but the barbarian prevented it by punching it back into place and using an action point to conveniently ignore the wonky physics involved. We wrapped that session and started the next one with the STC sending emissaries to the heads of state of the most important nations in the Inner Sea, asking for a very simple thing: to surrender their treasures to the STC. "Wait, really?" said Valinar. "All of this was so we could steal their wallets? We have a freaking fountain of gold. We have all the money anyone, anywhere could want." Hassan scowled at him. "First, no, there's never enough money. And second, I guess I'm a humble man with humble goals. What did you expect?" Since I noticed some lack of coordination, I finally gave in to the request of the other players and retconned that part, allowing them to better detail their message, which really was essentially only changed to, "Give us all your money and bow down to the STC." Save for an angry response from Nex, their emissaries returned empty-handed. A couple just didn't return at all. That's when Hassan decided it was time to make a demonstration. They set up some guys on magical flying contraptions and a crystal ball and sent them to Nex, which the rogue planned to obliterate in order to show the world he was serious. Emissaries were sent back to the other leaders with crystal balls connected to the first one so everyone could see the evidence. And without further ceremony, he called Baba Ganoush to issue the planetary bombardment order. Now, Hassan had expected the city of Mekatar to offer some sort of resistance, It was, after all, the capital city of a bunch of very powerful wizards. That's why he had 100 alum cross through a portal into Nex in order to stir problems near the border and make it look like an all-out offensive, playing on the thought that maybe they didn't know the alum no longer worked for Katapesh. As it turns out, the ruse worked, and while the Nexian Archlords were busy fighting scores of brass golems and bombarding Katapeshi ports with far too many maximized delayed blast fireballs, 5 iron golems were racing at terminal velocity right into their houses. The remaining Archlords managed to catch on and stop 2 of the golems, but 3 still got through their mass spamming of Wall of Force. One of the golems got teleported into a random location 1,000 miles away by a well-placed spell, the bottom of the Obari Ocean to be precise. Those 3 that got through, however, ended up being more than enough. It wasn't so much that the initial release of null matter tore away everything on its path, bringing down mile-high ivory towers and blasting thousands of people into nothingness, or that the golems crashing down at such tremendous speeds bore craters and turned the whole place into a slab of cheese. It was that Hassan had not properly gauged the problem of not simply releasing explosions of null matter. He had prepared the golems with dozens of portals, gateways that directly connected into what might as well be the most unforgiving region of the multiverse. So yes, Mekatar disappeared from the face of Galarian. The Archlords retreated, soon realizing there were forces beyond a mere war with Katapesh. But once the portals had eaten through everything in their path and created a gaping maw of oblivion, they just kept hungering for more. When there was no more earth or stone or wood or people to devour, they started pulling in any matter within reach, namely air. The wind soon went berserk, as if the whole world had been given a balloon and the golems had pierced the surface. And of course, there was this other one under the sea that just now took care of doing pretty much the same thing with the waters. "I think the point will get through," said Hassan, a tad worried. And it did, but not in the way Hassan expected. I mean, this is Pathfinder, which is just D&D with a new suit. And what leaders do in D&D when encountered with unsurmountable enemies is simple. Hire other people to handle it, hopefully in groups of 5. It all started with Sir John the Anointed and his rightful band of adventurers sent by none other than the High Hierophant of Osirian, who, after giving a heart-rending speech in the name of goodness and attempting to steer the evil ways of the STC back into the light, got thrown into the battle pit and eaten by Monsieur Mangatout, much to the pleasure of the audience. Then came Molstrom the Destroyer and his steel-clad companions, the envoys from the courts of Cheliax, bent on bringing down the evils from the desert that had threatened to engulf the world once and for all. Everyone agreed that they made a much better spectacle than Sir John before a tentacle with eyes turned them into goo. They were then followed by Lodanar the Elven Wizard, Arphix the Dark Huntress, Voltasar the Huge, Orphis the Singing Duelist, Barnabas the Pirate and his Bloody Boys, Akamarak the Sun-Touched, and a long list of heroes with progressively less detailed backgrounds and progressively more random names, each lasting less than the previous ones. For a time, it sort of became the new hobby of the party to set up all sorts of traps, mazes, monsters, and puzzles in their palace, just to see how far these men and women sent to end their reign of terror could get. But in all honesty, all they were doing was stalling the inevitable. Each day that passed, the darkness in the southern horizon grew larger, deeper, and more noticeable. Weather patterns no longer worked as they used to, wind becoming almost perpetually southward, the clouds above lined up always traveling in the same direction now, and the feeling in the air just wasn't right. You all know I dislike stating the obvious, but it might be possible that this plan of yours will end up taking us all down, said Rakim during a particularly gloom and silent dinner, during which the gem-encrusted helmets of Ulfmir Hammerbeard and his fellow dwarfs, who had just been killed by an acid-spewing trap set in the eastern wing earlier that morning, served as fruit plates. Jack nodded in silence. Even Vorgok, usually above the petty matters of mere mortals, seemed to puff from his cigar with certain unease. Valinar just held his stare firm over Hassan until the rogue acknowledged it. "What?" the rogue asked. "Don't give me that look. This plan was as much yours as it was mine." "Mine! Mine!" Valinar exploded, something which, although rare in him, had been happening progressively more often as of late. "Care to explain when did I make up such stupidity?" Hassan narrowed his eyes. "Quite the hypocrite, are we? Perhaps the original idea was mine, but no one jumped on the bandwagon quicker than you. You wanted it as much as me. Perhaps even more." The priest stood from the table furious. "You imbecile! All you had to do was threaten, not stab. What good is it now with the realms of man sending everything they have against us and the world itself breaking apart? Nothing, you hear me? Nothing. All your idiotic schemes, all your useless gold, it's all pointless now, and there's no one to blame but yourself." Rakim took off his diminutive glasses and waited for the mild ground shake to pass. A lot of those had been taking place lately. Hassan has a point. Any of us could have stopped him, but we all just went along with it. We're all accountable for what happens now. Jack and Vorgok sort of agreed, sort of grunted, but otherwise remained silent. Valinar pointed a shaky finger at Rakim. You will not. His hand closed into a firm grasp, and the control rune on Rakim's forehead began to glow slightly. But the purple gorilla managed to resist the priest's attempts, and in a fit of frustration, the latter stormed out of the dining hall. What on earth got to him? Finally asked Jack while chugging down some mercurial water. Hassan dismissed the point with a hand gesture. I don't know, and I probably don't care. But I have a plan for what's to come. At this point, I was handed a rather interesting situation, as both Hassan's and Valinar's players discussed secret plans with me regarding, well, how to save their asses. On one hand, Valinar took a portal back to his homeland, Cheliax, where he managed to hook up a meeting with no one of the priests of Savannah. Goddess of secrets and his personal deity, turns out no one knows how many members the cult of Savannah has, and those few priests anyone ever gets to contact at all go by the same name, no one. Through him, Valinar secured passage into the Hall of Veiled Mirrors, a place where supposedly the goddess could be contacted, something which could happen only once throughout the life of a person, and even then it was a complete gamble and might not happen at all. He mostly just spoke to Cloudy Mirrors, not knowing if Savannah was listening or not. He asked for the following: the power to save what he had accomplished. In return, I shall bind myself to a life of secrecy. With literally no signal acknowledging whether he had been blessed, cursed, or even hurt at all, Valinar went back to Saltspit to wait for the right moment. On the other hand, Hassan kept asking questions about Absalom, the trial of the Starstone, and all that stuff, to the point I told him that he would need to do some actual ground research to get any more intimate. So he took one of the guys from the Business Enhancement Division as a guide and went there to do some checking. Everyone at the table was intrigued at his plan, which he was not sharing in whole for dramatic reasons. At this point in the game, you have to understand we were all imagining pretty much all sorts of stuff coming up from a plan that somehow involved Hassan and an artifact known to turn people into gods. So after I told him everything he seemed to need, he went back to Saltspit. Yet before he could give everyone a proverbial hug, they were confronted with a gnome full of problems. I want it! I want everything! Baba Ganoush spread his arms in an all-encompassing gesture. The gold, the fountain, the gems, the wenches, the latrines, the STC, all mine! Hold on, you little shit, said Hassan. Do you want Vorgok to chew you away? Because that's exactly what will happen in 5 seconds unless you explain what the hell you're doing. The gnome laughed. Oh, so menacing. I'm scared. Indeed I am. But you'll be even more scared unless you give me what I want. The barbarian was about to turn him into a digestive element when Baba Ganoush took a tremendously delicate crystal bell from his robe. Nah, stop right there. This bell right here is the only thing stopping the words for golem activation from sending the entire network crashing down onto the planet. Everyone was locked into a Mexican standoff. The gnome continued. Yes, not so wise to trust me with the command words and give me full access to the golems now, eh? Oh, yes. Perhaps you thought I'd be loyal to you because I'd be loyal to money. Well, that's partially true, at least. His tone went down a notch, though still ridiculously gnomish. I do love money so very much. Let me get this straight, said Hassan. If we don't hand over the company, you will destroy the world. Yes, basically, the gnome responded. Aha, and what is there to stop us from killing you and taking the bell? Baba Ganoush thought about it for a second, just enough for Hassan to realize he shouldn't have played that card so quickly. When he noticed the sudden surge of panic in the gnome's eyes, that bastard was going to throw the bell down and take everyone down with him. Hold on, Jack tried to calm down the situation. No need to do something stupid. We'll all regret. Technically speaking, there will be no one left to regret it, pointed out Rakim. Jack gave him an urgent stare. Let's settle down and discuss this. Maybe we can come to a compromise. The gnome took a step back and threatened to drop the bell. Oh, no compromise. I've worked for you long enough to know what a compromise with the STC will get me. Perhaps you'll use my head to plant nightmares, or drown me in molten gold so you can set me as a statue on your desk. Ah, no. I know you'll stuff me with sand and then chop my head off so you can make a lot of magic powder. Never thought of that, said Vorgok. Maybe you give me the gold and then I find a way out. Maybe on the skyships or a portal. He was clearly falling apart. No, you'll get me anyways. Maybe if I just end it right here, we'll all be dead. The darkness is coming, and I'm to blame as much as you. Ah, yes, we did it. We broke the world. So, the gnome drops the bell. Everyone gasps. Jack manages to catch it just before it breaks. Vorgok pulls Baba Ganoush's head from his shoulders and kicks it out the window. Hassan let out a deep sigh. Good, now get that shit disenchanted, and walked out of the room, while poor Jack didn't even dare to breathe, holding the impossibly delicate thing between his hands, barely an inch from the floor. No, if you disenchant it, you can run the risk of releasing the command words. After all, that is precisely what the bell does. Keep them on hold. We need to find another way to deal with it. Where are you going? We do have a crisis here, as you may be well aware, snapped Valinar. Crisis just got averted. Work to do, and stepped outside. The priest was boiling with anger, but managed to calm down and whisper, I don't trust him, nor should any of you. He knows the end is drawing close and he'll save himself, even if it means stepping on us. Vorgok shook his head. No, Hassan might be greedy, self-serving, murderous, and backstabbing, but even beneath all that, he still remembers who his companions are, who he owes his life to, and who owes his life to him. He said in a rare moment of verbosity. You shall see, the priest warned. Savannah, if I ever needed you, now is the time, he said to no one in particular, while gazing at the looming darkness on the horizon. Fear not, my good companions. This is but another step in the way to greatness. We have come this far, and we shall go much further. Persevere, said Jack, swinging his sword around and stepping onto the balcony. I'm not usually a kill zone DM. In general, I try to always give characters a chance to hurt themselves without my help. But this time I just had to ask, Jack, what is your character doing? Swinging his sword and making a dramatic speech in the face of almost certain doom, of course. What else? You know, you did hold the key to Galarian's destruction in your hand just a moment ago. Huh. What did you do with it? I guess I... Wait. No one would be that careless. Make an int roll. If you roll 12 or more, your character didn't suddenly forget what he was doing. He rolls. Everyone at the table clearly tense. Managed it by a thread, a quiet shit is heard, only to have it kicked out of his hand by Hassan. Master, says Hassan, remember that portal I wanted to use later on to get to Absalom? Yes, I do. I kind of needed to use it right now. I run like hell. Meanwhile, in high orbit above Galarian, 45 iron golems reeking with obliteration start falling down into the planet. It wouldn't be instantaneous, but certainly catastrophic. Of course, had the party actually tried to be the heroes for once, they could have stopped them. But at that point, other things were in motion. Initially, the group tried to go after Hassan, but they quickly lost track of him. Just when Valinar attempted to track him with magic, the rogue returned. Quickly, through the portal! It's all according to plan, he said. It took some convincing, but eventually Hassan got to their senses about what he intended to do. When the golem started hitting Absalom, it would open a tear into the cathedral and make the way readily available to get to the Starstone, which Hassan hoped would grant them godhood. It was a very long shot. Of course, none of them knew that it was Hassan who had pulled the strings to get the bell into Baba Ganoush's hands in the first place, or that he was well aware of what would have happened if it had been disenchanted, or that he had tried to bring all the golems down on his own, only to be thwarted by the fact that they had specifically designed the trigger to work with all of them present as a sort of nuclear safe key. So they get to Absalom, where everyone is staring at the 5 points of light rushing towards the city. Word had already been spread of what happened to the south, how the seas were rioting and the skies were flailing and the land was breaking apart after the fist from the gods had come crashing over Mekatar. All we need to do now is wait until the golems crash down and obliterate the cathedral. Then we go in. Truth is, Hassan wasn't completely sure it would work, but he kept telling me he had this nagging feeling there'd be a way to make it work, and thus they waited. Riots took over the city eventually as panic spreads. The wizards who remained in the city had no idea how to stop the golems, the others having escaped after knowing that not even the Archlords of Nex had been able to stop their doom. Hundreds, if not thousands, launched themselves into the cathedral, in a final attempt to try and find the Starstone themselves and perhaps achieve godhood. After all, if a drunkard had managed to get in the past, why not them? Most of them died falling off the abyss outside the temple. In any case, as for the party, it served to do some end-of-the-world adventuring for good measure. Eventually the golems came into sight, The party had the wellspring handy in one of their bags of holding, so the worst-case scenario, they would spend the rest of their lives around it, trapped but unharmed. Then they fell. The land shook with impossible force, throwing everything around like a tumbling wagon. The dull sound of the portals opening and tearing reality apart came soon after, and the city was quickly engulfed in ever-growing pockets of darkness. Along with the other ones who were trying to get in and managed to cross the abyss, the party headed into the cathedral, as its ridiculously tall spires were eaten away into nothingness, revealing confounding mazes, changing hallways, and impossible puzzles just before disintegrating them too. "Go, go, go!" Hassan pushed everyone inside before a falling block of marble blocks the way out. The cool, seemingly endless main hall of the cathedral extended before them, unsettlingly empty. Then it begins to change and distort, as if the trial was already trying to compose itself, but the sheer destruction overtaking it was making it impossible. Eventually, even the roof gave way, and the illusion faltered, revealing an empty, featureless hall of dull stone, with nothing but a glowing object standing on top of a small pedestal. "The Star Stone," everyone said at once, and they all started running. There must have been 24 individuals in total, though Hassan made sure to thin that number down to 6 before getting to it. Then they all bounced off an invisible shield, and were suddenly confronted with a burning question inside their heads. Why? It sounded like a gigantic bell rung in their brains. They all looked at each other, attempting to guess what their companions were thinking. It seems everyone came to different conclusions. "Rakim, you can't let him get it," said Hassan. "He murdered your wife. Nay, he used her as a bag of meat. He made it so your son ate her from the inside out so he could sell her out for power and influence." Rakim attempted to keep his cool. "It doesn't matter now. Besides, so did you." "He's right, Hassan. You are as responsible for this as anyone," said the priest, his eyes fixated on the Starstone. Perhaps, he seemed to think for a moment. "You know what? Why deny it anymore? Yes, I used her. In fact, I'm glad I did. Would have given me some really nice rubies. Too bad she couldn't take it. Poor wench." Rakim gave him a puzzled look. Somewhere between rage suppression and befuddlement, he tried to keep it down, but eventually the walls he had built around his anger came crumbling down, all along while Hassan kept pushing it. And so he exploded in utter fury and charged at the rogue, who got out just in time. Valinar gathered his wits and took the chance given by Rakim's outburst. "Savannah, if I ever needed your help, it was now. Give to me what I asked, and I shall give you what I promised." At that point, I asked him how serious he was about that promise, making sure to use the "Are you sure you want to do this?" tone all DMs use when they warn a player about a dangerous consequence. He said yes. Then I expressly told him, "Remember that your standing with the goddess is, at best, dubious. There might be consequences, you know. Savannah's known for her tricks." He still said yes. I suppose a desperate man will hang on to a burning log if there's no other choice. And so he went blind and deaf all of a sudden. Also, Saltspit disappeared from the face of Galarian and became safely hidden in the perpetual darkness and endless veil of Savannah's realm, but none of them ever knew that. Blind and deaf perhaps, but still had his mind, and remembered Rakim's loss of composure just in time to will the control rune into activation, making Rakim fall under his admittedly shaky command. So he used it to attempt to go after Hassan, which he almost did, had not the rogue used Jack as a decoy and ended with the poor bard thoroughly punched. I allowed Rakim a very difficult will saving throw, but he failed and then discharged his fists all over Jack, whom not all the pros in the world would save now, finally succumbing to the enraged killing machine. The second time Hassan wasn't so lucky, and Rakim got him grounded and ready to smash him with all his might. However, Vorgok comes in at the last moment and shoves Hassan away, saving him from almost certain death, but receiving the brunt of the attack. They fight for a bit, both ending up pretty battered, but otherwise alive. This gives Rakim a second try at the will save, this time succeeding, giving him enough time to turn around, grab Valinar by the neck, and, without a single word, crush his spine between his hands. "Vorgok, help him!" Hassan yells when Rakim, still angry beyond belief and now again free to act, charges at him. The player behind the barbarian has never been able to properly master the rules, even after all these years, but he has an uncanny ability to survive and get excellent rolls. Not this time, though. Down to very few hit points, he looks at Hassan and says, "This is probably as far as I can go. Win this one for us, Hassan," and runs to tackle the purple monster, ending up in a grapple that takes his life away a few rounds afterwards. "Win this one for me," Hassan whispers under his breath and rises to confront Rakim. The duel between the two was quite impressive, but with oblivion closing in all around them and what remained of the cathedral falling as a rain of crushing death in all directions, it was about to draw to a close, regardless of who won. That's when Hassan decided to take his gamble and, after escaping Rakim's grapple, he ran as fast as he could into the Starstone, only to be confronted with the same invisible field and the ear-shattering question inside his head: why? He took one last breath and said, "Why? Because I want it." And with that, the world around them dissipated away into nothingness. And with that, the epic tale of the Industrious Rogue and his party comes to a conclusion. Tell me what you think in a comment down below. Before we take our leave, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Stay tuned for more amazing Dungeons & Dragons content every week.